In early April 1945, off the coast of Okinawa, the vast American fleet lay spread across the Pacific waters like a steel and canvas fortress. A tension unlike any other gripped the sailors aboard the radar Picket destroyers. The horizon shimmered with the heat of the sun, but more ominously, it bristled with the shadow of hundreds of incoming Japanese aircraft. The men knew that each approaching plane could mean sudden death, for this was not conventional warfare. These were kamikaze attacks, deliberate suicide missions meant to crash directly into ships and cause maximum destruction. The stakes for both sides were immense. For the Japanese, these missions were a desperate attempt to halt the relentless American advance across the Pacific Islands. For the Americans, Okinawa represented a crucial stepping stone, the last major stronghold before the Allied invasion of Japan itself. A group of sailors, young and often barely 20, manned the anti-aircraft guns with nerves stretched taut. Radar operators reported wave after wave of incoming aircraft, sometimes dozens at a time. The first glimpse of a Japanese Zero, its wings glinting in the sun, sent a shiver through the crew. They had trained for aerial assaults, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer determination of pilots willing to die to ensure the destruction of their target. Explosions erupted around the fleet as the kamikazes began their dive. Some planes were shot down, but too many found their mark, tearing through deck plating and sending fire and chaos across the ships. The commanding officers knew that without a radical improvement in anti-aircraft defense, casualties would escalate exponentially. The fleet could not simply rely on conventional shells, whose timing often failed to intercept the deadly aircraft in time. Each passing minute carried the heavy weight of life and death, not just for the men on the ships, but for the broader strategic objective of securing Okinawa. As the sun climbed higher over the Pacific, the shadow of destruction loomed closer, and the American forces faced a test of endurance, courage, and technological innovation that would soon alter the very nature of naval warfare. Before the United States could fully counter the kamikaze threat, a groundbreaking technological innovation was quietly taking shape in the laboratories of Johns Hopkins University. The VT Proximity Fuse, a top-secret project, promised to transform anti-aircraft warfare. Unlike traditional fuses, which required shells to make direct contact with enemy planes to detonate, the proximity fuse used a miniature radio transmitter and receiver embedded within the shell. As the shell approached its target, the fuse would detect the presence of the aircraft and trigger an automatic explosion. This meant that even near misses could destroy or severely damage incoming kamikazes, dramatically increasing the effectiveness of anti-aircraft fire. The development of the proximity fuse was not without immense challenges. Engineers had to miniaturize components at a scale never before attempted, ensuring that they could withstand the violent forces of being fired from a high-velocity naval gun. Laboratory tests were conducted under secrecy, and only a select group of scientists and military officials were aware of the fuse's existence. It represented a marriage of ingenuity, physics, and wartime necessity. The industrial effort to produce these fuses was equally staggering. Factories across the United States operated at full capacity, manufacturing millions of units to meet the urgent demand for deployment in the Pacific. Each fuse underwent rigorous quality control to guarantee reliability, for failure in battle could cost hundreds of lives and jeopardize the fleet's survival. As the Americans prepared to face the Japanese air onslaught at Okinawa, the proximity fuse promised a technological edge that could not be ignored. Radar operators, gunnery crews, and naval officers alike were briefed on how to integrate this innovation into their defensive strategies. Suddenly, anti-aircraft fire could be far more lethal and efficient. The fuse was a force multiplier, turning every shell into a more precise instrument of destruction against the kamikaze threat. In essence, it changed the rules of naval warfare, allowing ships to defend themselves more effectively without relying solely on sheer volume of fire. This innovation would soon meet its first major test. The approaching kamikaze waves would collide not just with American courage, but with the ingenuity of science and engineering. The fate of the fleet, and perhaps the outcome of the Okinawa campaign, now depended on whether this revolutionary technology could perform under the most harrowing conditions imaginable. As America prepared to deploy the revolutionary proximity fuses, Japan intensified its desperate measures to defend its homeland. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Air Force organized special attack units, known as Kamikaze squadrons, composed of young pilots trained to sacrifice their lives in deadly precision strikes against Allied ships. These missions were not mere acts of aggression. They were steeped in ideology and spiritual preparation. Pilots underwent rigorous mental and physical conditioning, often meditating on the honor of dying for their emperor and country. Each man believed that his death would serve a higher purpose, inflicting the greatest possible damage on the invading forces. The kamikaze aircraft themselves were essentially human-guided bombs. Pilots learned to maximize the destructive potential of each crash, targeting the most vulnerable parts of ships such as the bridge, engine rooms, or ammunition storage areas. They would approach at high speeds, often under heavy anti-aircraft fire, relying on skill and sheer determination to hit their targets. The very design of these attacks reflected the human wave tactics Japan increasingly relied upon in the closing months of the war. Trained engineers and pilots collaborated to optimize every aspect of the planes, from weight distribution to explosive payloads, ensuring that each mission carried the maximum possible lethality. For the American forces, these kamikaze tactics presented an unprecedented challenge. Conventional anti-aircraft strategies often proved insufficient against planes committed to suicide dives. The psychological strain on sailors was immense. They knew that unlike conventional attackers, kamikaze pilots would not retreat or surrender. Each sighting of an enemy aircraft brought a mix of fear, urgency, and the grim awareness that lives hung in the balance. Raider Picket ships, positioned to give early warning to the main fleet, became prime targets. The courage of the men aboard these ships was tested repeatedly as they faced waves of determined pilots willing to die for a single catastrophic strike. This stark contrast between Japan's human wave attacks and America's technological defenses highlighted a turning point in modern warfare. The introduction of the proximity fuse promised a way to counteract the kamikaze threat, leveling the playing field between desperate human ingenuity and advanced engineering. The coming battles would test both the resolve of the sailors and the effectiveness of the fuse, determining how many lives could be saved and how many ships would survive the relentless aerial assault at Okinawa. In April 1945, the first major kamikaze attacks against the American fleet off Okinawa began in earnest. The skies filled with the roar of engines as waves of Japanese aircraft dived toward the waiting ships. Raider Picket destroyers spotted the incoming planes first, sounding alarms that sent sailors scrambling to man anti-aircraft guns. As the kamikazes approached, the newly deployed VT proximity fuses were put to the ultimate test. Unlike previous encounters, gunners no longer had to rely on the near-impossible task of scoring direct hits. The shells equipped with these fuses exploded near their targets, shredding wings, igniting fuel tanks, and often destroying the enemy before it could reach the ships. One notable encounter involved the USS Laffy, a destroyer positioned on a critical radar picket line. The crew watched in tense anticipation as a formation of kamikaze planes approached. Anti-aircraft gunners fired steadily, shells arcing toward the diving aircraft. The proximity fuses triggered mid-air detonations, and the resulting explosions obliterated the incoming planes, showering the sea with debris. Sailors aboard the Laffy witnessed firsthand how this technology dramatically increased their survival odds. Fewer planes made it past the defensive perimeter, and the fleet experienced a reduction in casualties compared to previous engagements. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse was not limited to isolated encounters. Across the Pacific theater, American naval forces reported higher rates of kamikaze interceptions, saving lives and preserving vital ships for the continued assault on Japanese positions. The fuse allowed gunners to engage multiple targets rapidly, creating a dense shield of protective fire. It represented a fusion of science, industrial capability, and tactical necessity. In essence, it gave the United States Navy a decisive technological advantage at a time when human courage alone could not guarantee survival. By the end of the Okinawa campaign, the introduction of the proximity fuse had altered the outcome of countless kamikaze attacks. The American fleet, while still suffering losses, demonstrated that innovation could counter desperation. Ships that might have been destroyed survived, and sailors who might have perished continued to fight. The clash at sea became a testament to the power of technological ingenuity in warfare, proving that even in the face of the most determined human attacks, science could tip the scales.